Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, my guest is Bri Tartaglione. And Bri, if I butchered that, please save the day.
You had it spot on. Thank you for having me.
You're kind. I'm going to just read a brief bio about Bri, and then Bri is here today to tell you about her personal story and how she turned her life around. So Bri is a motivational speaker, a certified school counselor, emotional wellness coach, business owner, and podcast in the field of personal development and mental well-being. She holds 2 master's degrees in school and counseling psychology from Columbia and is working on completing her advanced certificate in clinical mental health counseling. She now lives and practices her work in New York City. Her 10 years of experience in psychology and education intersected with her unexpected personal medical journey, bringing about the inception of her organization, Bri Dorothea, LLC. The company focuses on providing curated services for individuals and teams to disrupt unhealthy emotional patterns and make room for mental health frameworks that promote emotional fitness and future potential. So I'm going to stop there. Her bio's got a little more, but I want her to have more talk time than me, telling about her story. Bri, I'm sure you're aware of this, but my audience is female trauma survivors from mostly interpersonal trauma, but of course, other traumas as well. And so we would love to hear your story. I believe it's going to bless other people. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Is there a certain place you'd like me to start, or kind of just jump into the medical piece, which is kind of the climax of where everything transpired?
Well, before the medical thing happened, were you already a counselor in the field?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually just for a year. So I graduated in 2019 and was school counseling for the following year. So I was a brand new counselor at the time that everything had happened, and which really was interesting for me too, because it was like I had learned all of these different, techniques and mechanisms and things of how, to help someone else who might be going through something. But it happened that I was one of my first real patients. I was patient zero for myself to figure out how would I counsel others to get through this scenario. That's what I'm going to try to embody for myself.
Okay. Yeah. So it was maybe a blessing then to already have some skills already. Yeah. Well, I guess I want to know, since before you needed a lot of help, you were already in the helping profession. So why did you go into the helping profession to begin with?
Yeah. So in undergrad, so I was born and raised in New England. I'm a Rhode Islander, and Rhode Islander at heart, but New Yorker now officially. But
I'm from Maine originally.
Okay. New England, something special about it. But born and raised in Rhode Island, went to undergrad in Boston, but really didn't know what exactly I wanted to do at that time. I was a communications major. I figured it was broad enough that I could sort of insert myself into any field with that sort of as a baseline. So I ended up in education, and I ended up working in this middle school in a learning center, and the learning center went by the TLC, or the Therapeutic Learning Center. And in the TLC, I worked with students who had very varied social, emotional, and behavioral abilities. And what I found was that I really loved working in education, but I wasn't particularly passionate about a specific subject. I found I was really passionate with working with these students in the TLC, and that was that social emotional piece. And so I kind of asked around in the school and knew a few of the other people who were working with these students. And it was the school psychologist and the school counselor. And so that's when I decided I really wanted to go into counseling. And that is what brought me to New York. So applied to Columbia, went to Teachers College there and got my degrees in school in counseling psychology. And that brought me up to 2019. So it was really students who brought me into counseling to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love hearing that. I was a school therapist myself for several years. Mm-hmm. And I found it extremely rewarding, but also a ton of work. Yeah. I understood after being a school therapist why it's a 10-year gig. I mean, sorry, a 10-month gig. And I have so much respect for teachers and school personnel. It's a very rigorous environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so is this a good point to ask about like what happened? I don't know where you are in your recovery journey at this point. Like if it's something still hard to talk about, or if you told the story 8,000 times and it's like talking about chewing gum at this point. I don't know, but we want to hear your story because we know that through pain comes healing and hope. So please share.
Yeah, of course. And I have told this story several times. Every time there's a part, and I'm sure with your audience, when you tell your story, your testimony, there is a piece of reliving it. But I would say at this point, I've found all of the beauty in the story, and it really is what has brought me into my career, my speaking, all of these other aspects of my life since. So I'm happy to jump into it and bring you through that. So the way that I really start the story is that the pandemic really happened in early March 2020. And for me, as the world was shutting down, so too was my body. And I didn't know it. I was 28 and I would have considered myself at the time a bill of health. I was very motivated in physical fitness, always trying to eat healthy. I mean, I felt like I was doing everything right and I was really in a good space, but we don't ask for the things that happen upon us. They just do. And on March 17th, actually, I'm going to start on March 16th. So March 16th was the last day that we were working on the ground. We found out that we were going remote on March 17th. So we had that one final Monday, at least in New York City, to figure everything out and figure out how we're going to do this all remotely for what we thought might be a couple of weeks. So on March 16th, we were in this meeting, and the week prior, I wasn't feeling well. So I was out sick a few days. And this was my first day actually back into work. So I was, kind of on this recovery just from just a small sickness that I took a few days off of work from. But I noticed that when we're in this meeting, trying to figure out how we're going to go remote, I had this weird tingling sensation happening in my feet, mainly in my toes. It was like a pins and needles sensation, but it was a little bit more intense to the point where I noticed it and it was bothering me. I was kind of trying to shake it out, figure out what was going on. As the day went on, that feeling didn't go away like pins and needles typically do. It actually grew more intense and through my body. So it went from my toes to spread through my feet. Again, as the hours went by, spread up through my legs, all the way up into my midsection. And this was over several hours. And my colleagues were asking, because at this point, usually I'm very attentive in meetings, especially for one that's so important like this. And I couldn't pay attention. I wasn't in my seat. I was kind of standing behind my chair trying to shake my legs out. One of the funny parts about it was one of my colleagues was like, Bri, you were out sick last week. He's like, you just need some protein. You just need like something in your body. You haven't really eaten. You don't have that nourishment. I'm like, you're right. I definitely need protein. It's not what I needed. We tried a protein shake. That wasn't it. I did make it through the rest of that day. We did have the plan to go remote the next day. That evening, the intensity of this tingling sensation was still very present. And at this point, it was growing more and more serious. I was definitely concerned, but I figured I would sleep it off. I had assumed that it would just go away in the nighttime.
What did you think what did you think it was? Did you think it was just stress? What did you think was going on?
I was pretty sure that it was just something like sort of like an aftermath of being sick. Like when my friend had said, you didn't really eat anything. I really didn't. He was right. I couldn't really eat the week before. I had like mashed potatoes was really all I could stomach, something soft and plain. So I just thought that I really didn't have nutrients in my body. My body was having a strange reaction from it. It didn't hurt at that point. It was just a very intensified pins and needles that I thought, it could be based on not having enough nutrients in me, not having moved my body a lot because I was pretty sedentary the week prior. I kind of just thought it was a combination of things because I hadn't been sick in several years. So I also really didn't think about, what it's like recovering from being sick. It's like, maybe this is just one of those things I haven't experienced yet, but I wasn't too concerned at this point. It was in the evening and as I went to sleep where the concern started to rise. So I did try to go to sleep, but I found that my legs continued to wake me up. And then, we go down the rabbit hole of the internet and what I found was restless leg syndrome. And that is exactly what was happening. Like my legs just kept waking me up. I couldn't get them to settle down. I couldn't get this strange sensation out of my body. So every time I woke up, I kind of tried to get up and walk it out. And this was happening more and more frequently throughout the night. So I went from waking up every hour to every half hour to really not being able to sleep at all. The final time that I woke up was really when the alarm bell went off in my head because I tried to get out of the bed and I stumbled. Not because I violently rolled out of bed, but because my legs just didn't support me. And so I had to use the wall to kind of hold myself up and pick myself back up. And again, I just thought maybe I'm tired. So I'm just brushing off these things. But at that point, I was like, oh, that is weird. I had stumbled kind of like into I had a mirror and in my room and I had kind of stumbled over there. And I think I went into the mirror to kind of like check to see if I had any other symptoms going on, like what was happening. And I kind of like touched my face to look to see like are my eyes, and when I touched my face, that's when I realized that the sensation had also taken control of my face, skull, and neck. So it wasn't a pins and needles sensation, but it was a numbing sensation because when I touched my face, I felt nothing. That was when the alarm bells went off for me. So I realized that, I need to do something is wrong here. Something is not okay. I called my parents, kind of let them know. I'm like, I think something's really wrong. I'm going to go to the emergency room. And fast forward, I did bring myself to the emergency room. And at this point, it happened very quick in the morning that once I noticed that the intensity of my legs, it just grew tenfold very quickly. And when I got to the emergency room, it was so bad that I had to scale myself along the triage desk. And the only thing I could say to the triage nurse was, I think my legs are about to collapse beneath me. And no sooner than I said it, did it happen. I can pause there for a moment because I know that was long-winded. And I am definitely happy to continue on with the story, but I will take a brief pause if you have any questions so far.
Well, take a drink of water. I had read your story, so I did follow up to this point, and I can't imagine how frightening that was for you. I guess my one question that stands out right away is like your legs gave out, but you didn't pass out, right? You were alert during this time?
Yes,
Okay.
I was completely alert. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah, I did not pass out. It was, my legs just totally gave out beneath me. And I remember someone kind of coming up behind me and scooping me into a wheelchair. And at this point now, this numbing, tingling sensation has turned into a painful one. Painful to the point where the shooting pains were so intense. It felt like fire or knives or something just so incredibly intense, just raking through my legs. And I just can't even find a better description than that it felt like my body was on fire. And so at this point, I'm really scared. I am in this emergency room in incredibly intense pain, trying to figure out what's going on. I'm asking, for someone to help me because, again, it intensified so quick that morning. And what was more scary for me was not this intense pain, but it was actually when all of the pain went away and then I could no longer feel anything. And this happened about an hour into being into the emergency room. So after that really intense fire-like pain, everything just left my body. And I had no ability from that point on to move the bottom half of my body or most of the top half of my body. So I really only had mobility of my arms. I was able to speak, but if you've ever gone to the dentist and they put that numbing in your mouth, it was something like that where like I didn't even know if my speech was coming out correctly. And from there, this was also on March 17th, which was the day that hospitals went into lockdown. So things were happening rapidly with COVID as well. So when I had called my parents, they were in Rhode Island. I'm in New York. It's about a 4-hour drive. They drove to me that morning. I remember when they arrived and I didn't see my dad. He was waiting outside in the car because at that point, only one visitor could come in because of the COVID protocols that they had just implemented. So they were going to rotate. And I remember at this point, they had me on a lot of different medications to try to help with the pain and the numbing and figure out everything. So I was pretty out of it, but I remember seeing a flash of my mom and then that was it. And then when I woke up again, I was in extreme isolation, something that you see in movies. The doctors were all in hazmat suits. And I found out that the hospital had been locked down. So now I'm really scared in general because we have this really scary thing happening outside that no one understands or knows about. And the people who we would hope who could understand it and know about it just don't yet. The hospital doctors just don't know what's going on yet. And understandably so. But at the time I was so scared because how am I supposed to, I couldn't figure anything out for myself. It was like, how is this happening to me? How is this happening outside? So I was alone for that time. Within this time frame, I was, by doctor standards, completely paralyzed from the waist down and 80% paralyzed from the neck up. The conversations that I had at this point with doctors were that they weren't sure what was going on. They didn't know when they were going to figure it out, if they were able to at all. They had already run just about every test that they could possibly run, including, and this is, my friends always joke about this, including 3 COVID tests, which at that time, my friends were like, celebrities couldn't even get COVID tests at that time. I'm like, I got 3 because they were so confused as to what was going on. Those all came back negative. Again, we'll never know because it just wasn't advanced at that point. But the conversations after that, because they weren't able to figure out what was going on right away, were what might happen next. And those preparations were that this could get worse. This could be your new reality. We could have to amputate, or you might be wheelchair bound for the remainder of your life. And to hear all these things at 28, when just a week prior I was lifting in the gym, was devastating.
Yeah.
So that was in my mind, and that was my reality for about the first 5 days in the hospital. Just being left in the complete dark, not being able to have visitors, just a lot of FaceTime and phone calls, no one knowing what was going on, and me trying to figure out how I'm going to do this. What's next? What happened? What's going on? Having all these questions in my head.
Can I ask you how your mom was doing? My heart just had such mom compassion.
Yeah, it was so difficult for my parents, especially because they were there. It was like, through the glass, you put your hand, because they were there, and then they were told they had to leave as this was all happening. So both of my parents were devastated. At one point, I actually remember when I was in the emergency room. So when my parents were still driving there, and when I still had this pain, I remember hearing my dad, like I could hear him, because I was screaming in pain. That was the intensity of pain. And I was on my cell phone with my mom, and she's like, your dad's on the phone with them trying to get you more medicine, because it was so intense. And I could hear my dad coming through the emergency room desk phone being like, please help her. Please help her. Like I can, so it was really intense. And my parents were really scared. They didn't know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question.
Please.
I brought my brother to the ER one time, writhing in pain, and he wasn't treated very well because they thought maybe he was drug seeking. Did you have that experience at all, or was the staff compassionate and knew there's something really wrong?
The staff was compassionate. I think because I did collapse, they definitely knew that something was happening. Mm-hmm. They were having to assist me to the bathroom, just the intensity. However, there's only so much that they can do. And that was what was difficult, because they really couldn't give me anything more than,
right.
than pain relief, like an intense pain reliever, but even that wasn't doing it. Right. So that was what was really difficult, was they had a capacity, they reached it, and I was still just in intense, incredible pain.
Yeah. So not kidney stones for you.
Yeah. So in this time when I had no idea what was going on, it was a tug of war for me in my head. And this is where I said, I just got this incredible therapeutic training. I'm a new counselor. How would I help someone in my situation? So I'm going through that in my head, and, trying to remain positive. And that was typically my disposition anyway, is trying to see the glass as half full in whatever situation. But in a situation like this, it's really tough to rationalize those things when you just want to ask why. You want to ask someone why, and you want someone to be able to answer. And I wasn't getting that answer.
This was the biggest trauma of your life. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that, that piece is definitely a big talking point for me, that wanting to ask why, which I can talk about sort of that lesson and that learning point at the end of the story, but I will just continue through here. I was waking up every day in those first 5 days and trying to move something. And it's interesting when you lose that type of mobility, because the connection doesn't fire. So you think you can move your leg and you know you've been able to do it before. And in your head, you're like, okay, Brianna, move your leg. And I would look down and I couldn't do it. Trying to lift, I'm trying to bend, trying to roll my ankle, wiggle my toe, any type of movement. And the first 5 days, I just wasn't able to. The first 4 days, I just wasn't able to. On the fifth day, I woke up with that same intention to see if I could move anything, do anything. And I couldn't move my thigh, my knee, any part of my leg. I tried to roll my ankle. I couldn't. And then I got to my toes, and not a fraction of a millimeter was I able to wiggle my big toe. And that was like, I don't even know the expression of like hope that gave me, was being able to wiggle my toe. So at this point, doctors had also been able to give me a preliminary diagnosis that they were trying out a medication for. And that was when it seemed to be working. And the diagnosis was interesting because what we found out that I have is actually an extremely rare condition for adults, because it's still rare, but not as rare, and happens much more typically in children, which is why when they ran every test in the book, that wasn't one of them initially, because it just wasn't, it wouldn't happen. And they didn't think it's a 1% chance or less than to happen to a 28-year-old woman. And what that condition actually is it's an autoimmune condition that my immune system essentially goes into overdrive randomly, and it attacks the healthy cells in my brain and in my spine. So after learning about that, the doctors also, and when I said I wiggled my toe, the doctors then started having conversations with me about the miraculous nature of what was happening. And I also didn't understand that, but the way that they explained it to me is that the brain and the spine are the two systems in our body that control absolutely everything. And when my body attacks those healthy cells, that means that absolutely anything can be under attack, essentially. And so it was the fact that they said it was miraculous, that it was just the singularity of mobility that was taken from me, rather than my cognition, my memory, my intellect, my speech, my senses, my memory. So I still had all of these functioning pieces of me, and it was just this really isolated, singular piece that was affected. So, that was sort of a ray of hope as well. Again, I still didn't know if I would ever walk again, but that was encouraging for me to hear them say, like, this is miraculous. And the fact that you're wiggling your toes now is also miraculous, that we can try to get you back to where you were. Do you want to, well, I could pause again. I know it's a long story, but.
Yeah. I guess maybe it would be helpful to know the name of the disorder. And I also want to know, are children simply just the carriers? Did you catch this from school? From children?
No. Okay. No, that's a great question. So the name of the condition, the long name is acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. The way that it's referred to is ADEM, ADEM, if anyone wants to look it up. But it is a condition, so it's not something that's caught, but it is something that's onset with viruses or vaccines, which was really difficult for my recovery process, because again, this is COVID. And so there is this rampant virus going on in the world that, especially at that time, we had no idea about. So within my recovery, extreme isolation for me was an understatement. And then so too was it when the vaccinations came out, because I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. my body can go into overdrive with this condition if I catch COVID, and it can go into overdrive with this condition if I get the vaccine to prevent COVID. So that recovery was incredibly challenging for me to try to work with doctors and navigate and figure out what makes sense for me, what is comfortable for me, where is my choice in all of this. So that's just one piece of it. And so again, it wasn't caught. It was a condition. They do believe it was onset by the virus being sick the week prior. But again, we'll never know if that was COVID or another virus or what it was. Speculation for me is that it was COVID. But again, that is just speculation. And I have had doctors who have since said, this is too weird.
Right.
This is just so strange.
The timing.
We've never seen something like this. So, that is that piece. But I guess the shining light moment of the story is that there was a very intense recovery process. But prior to that, I did turn 29 in the hospital. And this was just a few days after I had wiggled my toe. And I was so determined at that point to be able to move my body and walk again and take steps again. And I did take my first steps again on my 29th birthday.
Yay!
I know, it's such a celebratory moment. It's like, I still get chills every time I say it because, and my joke to myself is I think the only blessing more beautiful on my birthday would be if I had a child on my birthday, which my future children, who knows, maybe one of them will come on that day. But until then, this was for sure the greatest blessing that I could have ever imagined for myself.
Yes. I'm so thankful that your story has this beautiful ending.
Yeah.
Not an ending, but beautiful turning point. Because you're still alive. Your story's still ongoing.
It sure is.
So tell us about the healing journey physically. Physically is important, but I think what might be huge for people listening to is mentally as well.
Absolutely. And that piece right there is really what pushed me into my business, the mental health component, the piece of, going through something incredibly traumatic and trying to figure out how to navigate it afterwards. So I'm definitely happy to chat about that. So physically, it was a very intense rehabilitation process. I was in an inpatient rehab for quite a while, and then it turned into outpatient and me sort of rehabbing myself. And I did say prior to, I was really into fitness, but I hated running. And after this, I fell in love with running because it became a therapeutic part physically and emotionally for me to overcome this. And I had never run more than, I think, a 5K, which is maybe 3 miles prior to. And at this point, I joke that I really felt like Forrest Gump. Like once I took those first steps and learned how to walk again, I never wanted to stop. I went from walking long distances to trying to jog a mile or so to just running and running and running for months after. And here we are 2 years later. I've since run marathon distances just because I can't stop. It feels so incredible for me. And that really pairs with the mental health piece. So I spoke about asking why. And that is a place where so many of us get trapped because when we ask why, we're looking for an answer that we can't provide. So we're looking for someone or something to empower us outside of us, which can happen, but it's very rare, especially in the instance of getting the answer to the question why. For me, I realized how powerless I was making myself by asking why me? Why is this happening? Why did this happen? Why me? And I know that for trauma across the board, that is a question that we can ask ourselves. And though it's not as simple as flipping a switch, I realize that the way for me to take back at least a piece of that power was in reframing that singular thought that was ruminating and all consuming in my mind and taking the power back. And for me, that turned into saying, because me, because this happened, because this is my journey, because I have to take this situation and use it in my life, because this is where I figure out what's next in my life. So I tried to really flip the script there and re-empower myself, because when I say because me, I have taken it all back. I have owned every part of this experience that I was previously looking for ownership to. Not owned it in the sense that I brought it onto myself, but owned it in the sense that it became a part of my experience. And because of that, I'm going to house it as a part of my experience and figure out how that part of my experience continues to develop the rest of my experience.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that piece right there is a really big talking point, especially with the motivational speaking that I will do. And a few other pieces. So as far as my mental health recovery, that was huge for me. And I found that I actually do my best thinking when I'm running now. And, that was where I was empowering myself. It was just, I went from this low place to this place where I found growth every day from the experience. And that helped me reestablish who I was with this condition. So, I didn't just say because me, and then I was healed. I actually, interestingly enough, and shout out to NYU Langone Medical, because they provided me, and I know as a therapist, you will appreciate this, with every possible therapeutic intervention there could have been. I'm talking, obviously I had a psychotherapist or psychologist that I was working with, but, and obviously there was physical therapy, and then there was occupational therapy to learn, again, like how to stand on my tippy toes and reach for something in a cabinet, which was really difficult, or how to get in the shower without slipping because I had really weak legs, or how to, do all these other things. I had occupational therapy as well, but I also had horticulture therapy. I had art therapy. I had sound therapy. I had a movement therapy. I mean, I had this incredible breadth of experience, therapeutic experience to help me, because they understood the trauma of this experience, and they knew that this experience was life-changing for me, walking or not, fully recovered or not. Going through something like this it changes you. So they did provide me with absolutely everything. And for me, I found that, working on my mental health incrementally and working on this, this new part of me and incorporating this new part of me into my journey, was a day by day process, figuring out, how do I talk about this? How do I name this? How do I use this? How do I empower others with this? How do I continue to stay centered with this? So, I found, and again, it all happened through running, but there was just this constant sort of back and forth question and answer session with myself to make sure I was tuning into how I was feeling and how I was, going to continue to feel and continue to move through this condition, especially because they don't know if it will happen again. And that was, again, like I said, really, really difficult for me, especially at the height of COVID, that the paranoia was incredible. I didn't know, to think that I could catch this virus that everyone is catching and this could happen again. Or when there's this potential cure or like dampening of the virus to get a vaccine that could really help. Can't do that either. So that paranoia piece was something that took a lot of time for me to figure out how to live with and how to continue to live my life and live a fulfilled life when I now feel like I'm living in a bubble. And I know that everyone's kind of experiencing it, but I know personally that my body might shut down. Other people, it might not affect them the same, but my body might just shut down on me again. And so it was that part specifically was the most difficult for me to work through and took a lot of time in the moment as it was happening for the past several years to really be able to grasp a hold of that power for me, because it's difficult to live in fear, but we do sometimes, and we have to figure out how to make that fear a part of ourselves as well.
Yes. And so fear is huge. I think because I could talk to you all day about this. I think you have a lot to share, but the interest of time, maybe if we could start summarizing with your takeaways on when someone is really struggling with fear from whatever are trying to overcome, what are your top tips on working through that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I could speak on. And first and foremost, it's tough to get rid of fear. Fear doesn't, unfortunately, go away so easily. It's something that we have to live with. However, it is also something that doesn't have to control us. And a big part of what I learned actually when I was learning how to take steps again was this piece of consciousness that I realized, somehow I will say blessed to be able to learn how to walk again, because most of us as humans don't learn how to walk as conscious beings. We're sort of semi-conscious at that point, or subconscious when we're young, just sensory conscious, so to speak. So that consciousness piece woke me up to so much. And that is one of these takeaways where I was walking literally, metaphorically and literally through life unconsciously. I had never thought about what it took to take steps or what it took to be able to move through the world fluidly without question. And that piece of consciousness I found has paired with every other aspect of my life, most importantly with feelings. And the feeling of fear, though, again, it's hard to push out of our lives. It's a natural occurrence in our lives. When we wake up to it, we're able to put it in the place where we can still live with it. I guess if that is, the best way that I can put it is that anything that we're feeling, and fear for sure for me was that feeling, doesn't have to be who we become, but we internalize and then become the emotions we're experiencing, especially when they're intense. So becoming fear for me might have looked like never going outside for a run again, or, never really never doing anything because that fear took over who I was. Instead, I allowed myself to take in the fear, really understand what it was that scared me most, but also understand that that singular piece doesn't have to be everything else. My fear doesn't have to take away my happiness. My fear doesn't have to take away my joy for doing something. So that consciousness piece allowed me to understand that fear doesn't have to be the only thing that I feel and the only thing that I embody. I found a space for it where I will still have this fear, but this fear won't have me. And that is really in the recovery process. And I know that trauma comes in all shapes and forms and sizes and far beyond a medical experience that I had. And I'm so aware of that. And the fear of something, of a relived experience is already partially reliving it. And that's unfair because we don't have to continue to live in fear to relive traumatic experiences. We can hold that fear in a place and understand that it has shaped us in a way that's allowed us to form new conclusions about ourselves and our future in the world. But we don't have to continue to become it and allow that trauma to continue to re-experience within us. Because fear can be unfair. And when you put it in its place, and it does have a place, it's okay to walk with it. It's okay to move with it, but make sure it's in its place. And that place isn't all of you.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Bri, for anyone that wants to connect with you after listening to your story, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah. So you can find me first. My website is briundeniably.com. That's briundeniably.com. That's also all of my social profiles. So you can find me at Bri Undeniably on all of my social platforms. You can reach out to me on any of them. I am most active on Instagram. I'm also active on LinkedIn, as well as my email. It's bri@briundeniably.com. You can find it all on my website as well. So any place that you reach out to me, please, I encourage you to. And, I hope to continue to be able to work with women and individuals to help them through their experiences and be able to embody them in a way that allow them to continue to move through the world.
All right. Well, thanks, Bri, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.